Why does Martin Zubimendi not get talked about the same as other players? I don't know. We're going to talk about that and more in today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal News Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is very much appreciated. I hope you've had a fantastic week so far. It's already Tuesday, worst day of the week. Especially because it's the end of my holiday. Of course, I am in unusual surroundings compared to what you're usually used to. So apologies for that. But I'll be back with the usual sound, usual surroundings tomorrow. So make sure you tune in with bated breath for that. But yes, thank you for the patience. Thank you for appreciating that the audio level has not been the usual for what we usually expect of the channel, but yeah, it's it's gonna be back tomorrow, don't worry. And in a few weeks time we've got some interesting stuff coming as well, which I'm looking forward to as well, and maybe some even grander changes to things, but that's all I'll say about that for now. Good morning to all of you joining us live in the chat box. Hope you're doing good, hope you're doing well. Kim, Lee, Knowledge, Carlton, Martin, Knowledge, Lars, Rancid, Maximius, Black Shine, Matt G, Rowan, Hooded Gooner, Jamil and Rob, Shari, Steve, Barry T and Gooner 76, Rantley Poos and Tom, NSW, Pat, Olawale, Amaka, Stevie, Rob, Mr. Ree, good to see you back, Ezed, Tom, Carl, Amira, Simple Unity, and plenty more of you guys and girls in the chat box as well. Thank you so much as always for tuning in and being here. It is greatly appreciated, especially considering this is still a very elongated international break, and you know, you guys have been tuning in and listening to the shows as frivolously as always, which is great to see the show doing so well, despite it being such a, well, dull period. But we've got some nice stories to talk about today, and let's not waste any time. Make sure you drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, all that usual YouTube-y stuff. Do not leave us in the lurch. Drop a like, help us out. Right, let's kick off with both Declan Rice and Miles Lewis-Skelly becoming what it seems to be starting figures in Thomas Tuchel's England squad. Both of them started once again as they beat Latvia 3-0. No goals for either player in this specific fixture. But what there was again, kind of a reassurance, if you like, that Lewis-Skelly seemingly is very much in the mind of Tuchel moving forwards to be his left back. And not only that, but there were some really interesting quotes. We kind of skipped over these yesterday. I don't know why we did. We just didn't really talk about them. But there was a really interesting quote from Tuchel regarding kind of the use of Arsenal players, I guess, because he was very specific about talking about how Arteta has used Rice in certain games as well. And I don't think it's a dig. I think it's just the truth in terms of what gets played and how players are played. He says, I know that this window, this camp, is where the clubs play a very crucial time of the season. They play for championships, they play for quarterfinals in the Champions League. We are very well aware of it, but we also have our own goals. We have our own targets. The players are keen to play, and it has to be like this. I always accepted it as a club manager. I never got involved in lineups. I never pushed any national coach because I was hoping that my players get picked. I was also hoping that they were proud to play. Of course, you're never happy if something happens. No one can predict that there is no accident, but we have a World Cup qualifier and we'll take responsible decisions. He goes on when kind of pressed about the scenario where Arteta has kind of talked about the usage and the minutes of players and how Declan Rice was used in a game, you know, against PSV where we were 7-1 up already. And Tuchel points that out. He says, after a 7-1 first leg and Declan Rice playing the next match with Arsenal, I didn't have the feeling that they think so much about us. I don't think we have to break our heads about this. I take care about the players. We take care about the schedule. But it would be the wrong signal to tell players now, hey, you have tough matches coming up, so I rest you now. I just hope that there's kind of a, as Tuchel says, I hope that there's a common sense. He does seem to talk about kind of a responsibility, if you like, about these players. I hope that that is when there is friendlies and a player has played like a lot of minutes. Like those friendlies or Nations League games against nobody effectively. And there are still friendly matches, of course, that take place. I hope that when those games come around, that they do take responsible decisions. But I think he's absolutely fair to point out that Declan Rice started against PSV after winning 7-1. If you wanted to rest Declan Rice, if we're feeling like Declan Rice needs a rest, you wouldn't have played him in that game. So it's very much that's the way inclined. Martin says Rice is an asset of Arsenal Football Club, so they will obviously play him. They pay his wages. So do England, Martin. England pay the players' wages when they are on international duty. He is an asset not just of Arsenal, he is an asset also of England. That's the way football works. That's how it does work. I just hope that there is an extra responsibility taken when there are games of much less importance. These are the first games of Thomas Tuchel's tenure. They are World Cup qualifiers. I don't think we can have too much to complain about with that. But when it comes to friendlies and say players have played a lot of football, and a rest would really help them, not just from a club side of things, but also from an international perspective, that's when we can be a little bit more scrutinising when it comes to those players. So I think it's important to find the balance in those areas. But yes, Miles Lewis-Skelly and Rice starting once again for Thomas Tuchel's team. Ethan Nwaneri, meanwhile, scoring also in his first start for England's under-21s with what was certainly a trademark goal, cutting in off the right-hand side, moving into the central area, bending a shot into the bottom left-hand corner. Excellent piece of work by Nwaneri. Totally what we've come to expect from him. And a massive congratulations as he, like Lewis-Skelly, has taken his next step in his international career and is getting himself on the score sheet as well. I imagine that he'll be getting himself plenty more on the score sheet and more into the starting 11 as things progress, maybe even into the senior national team if his forays with the England senior, or Arsenal's kind of senior side continue as well. Really good news on that front. Thomas Partey scored twice for Ghana in their game. Obviously, a lot of Arsenal fans are always a little bit nervous when Partey goes away on international duty because that is where he has experienced injuries before. But so far, no issues. Certainly a positive sign in that sense. Scoring, I think, 2 headers from 2 crosses, actually, with the 2 goals that Thomas Partey managed while international duty. And, you know, Arsenal have been lacking a little bit in terms of their set-piece threat. So maybe Thomas Partey's form here will help us moving forwards into the latter stage of the season when we have our own set pieces. Maybe he can be something of a danger man in the box for Arsenal as well. So more positivity there. Moving into kind of transfers though, and we begin a couple of stories here with Hugo Ekitike. Now, we know that the player, of course, has been excellent this season. The France under-21s international, got a hat-trick, actually, against England's under-21s during this international break. But he has been on absolute fire when it comes to Frankfurt this season. He will, of course, be taking on Tottenham Hotspur in the quarterfinals of the Europa League, looking to knock out Arsenal's North London rivals. But he is being linked, according to Bild, with Arsenal. Arsenal are said to be very keen on keeping a keen eye, at least, on the France Youth International. He has 13 goals and 4 assists in 25 league games in the Bundesliga, 19 goals and 8 assists across 38 matches this season as well. And he's more of he was a player that playing, of course, with Omar Marmoush prior to his move to Manchester City. Since Marmoush has left, Ekitike has taken a lot more of that attacking burden, attacking responsibility. And he's taken that on reasonably well. Yes, the output has dipped since Omar Marmoush has left, and so has their form. Without Omar Marmoush, they lost 4-0 to Bayern, 4-1 to Bayer Leverkusen, 2-1 to Union Berlin. They finally been able to get things back on track somewhat with a 3-1 win over Bochum, in which Hugo Ekitike got an assist. But of course, in the Europa League, they have progressed kind of very comfortably, if you like, past Ajax. He got a goal and an assist in a 4-1 win at home in the second leg of that game. And now, of course, they will play Tottenham in the next round. But Ekitike has been a player I think a lot of fans are keeping their eye on. I think we will be very much a side that are maybe in the fold for a player like that, who is a versatile attacker, could play in multiple roles, and certainly should be on Arsenal's radar. But I think there are other players that are higher up the list, let's say, when it comes to Arsenal's summer striker options. Now, I want to end part 1 and kind of bleed into part 2, if you will, talking about Zubimendi. Because for any that watched the game against the Netherlands, which if you haven't seen, was an absolutely fantastic occasion, 3-3 on the night, 5-5 on aggregate, and then a Spanish penalty victory in the latter stages of that match. But Martin Zubimendi had a fantastic appearance during this game. Absolutely bossed things, intercepting more than any other player on the field, brilliant passing efforts, progressing the play forwards and keeping Spain very much in this game. Now, I want to talk about Zubimendi a little bit because I have never quite experienced the player get spoken about as disparagingly prior to a move to Arsenal, which, of course, at the moment there is a lot of confidence about a move to Arsenal in the summer. And it's almost like whenever he has a performance or he plays in the Champions League against the PSG or whoever, I always get this feeling that there's a lot of noise and a lot of talk about Zubimendi after a game where he doesn't necessarily have an outstanding, not necessarily a bad display by any stretch of the imagination, but a performance which is like, wow, like we saw last night was a wow performance from Zubimendi. And I have not seen the same amount of energy as I sometimes see, of course. By the way, the performance that we saw last night is what you made the majority of the time is the type of performance that we do see from Zubimendi. Of course, playing for Spain, he's now surrounded by better players than he is usually week in, week out for La Real. But at the same time, he also produces some fantastic performances for La Real pretty much every single week. If you speak to anybody who watches him, week out, like we did, of course, with Sid Lowe on the show, you will hear him talking about Zubimendi in the best of terms. You listen to Graham Hunter talking on Sophie's Highbury Squad show about Martin Zubimendi. You talk about a player that is hugely appreciated, very much liked. And of course, we already know that Real Madrid have said to have had interest in him, but Arsenal are also considered to be very much far advanced in this deal ahead of a summer move where they are willing to pay that £50 million release clause in the player's contract, or at least maybe pay slightly more than that to get the player in on more favourable terms. But I want to get your thoughts in part two as well on this point. Why do you think that it is that Zubimendi slightly differs in terms of other players that Arsenal get linked to? You know, you don't tend to hear people talking about Zubimendi's best performances when they happen, and they happen a lot. So we're going to go to part two in a second, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on that. So let me know what you're thinking. And I mean, does it have anything to do with I know Thomas Partey, of course, currently he's expected to leave that role moving forwards. He's expected to move on in the summer. And I know that Thomas Partey has a very passionate following behind him. Has that got something to do with it? I don't know. But Martin Zubimendi is such a consistent performer, and it's only on these few occasions where he doesn't necessarily have the most standout of games. But when he doesn't have those standout games, I almost feel like they get dragged up and talked about a lot more. But let me know what you think. We're going to go to part two with your questions and your thoughts on this topic right after this. This is part two of the show where we're going to be going into the chat box, taking some of your questions and comments, and also some of your thoughts, hopefully, on the topic that I've just brought up at the end of part one on Martin Zubimendi as well. If you haven't already done so, please do drop a like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel. Is this slightly blurry camera? I haven't got my usual camera at the moment. I feel like I'm getting bathed in light from behind, from the Almighty above. Let's take on some of these comments then. Martin says it's because he's not a flashy playmaker type player that, of course, some fans are craving right now. Scrolling up in the chat a little bit more. Let's see if we had some. I know I introduced that topic right at the end, so we may get some questions. I'll try and save some of these points for we are in part two, but for some more of these as well. Temi says, Tom, how do you explain keeping a keen eye on something? How do you explain being keen on keeping a keen eye? Well, you're keen on being keen about something, like Temi's love life. Jamie says, would you rather sign Zubi and play Rice as an 8, or Bruno Guimaraes and play Rice as a 6? It's a good question. I think if you could get Guimaraes for a reasonable price tag, which I think is unlikely, he probably would be more desirable, perhaps. He is older. I mean, Bruno Guimaraes now is, 28, I think. He turns 28 in November, but he is 27 until he turns 28, because that is how it works. Of course, Zubimendi only, he's 18 months younger. than Guimaraes. But I don't think there's any doubt in saying Guimaraes is, the less risk in terms of that, and playing Rice therefore at 6. But I think we've seen a lot of progression actually from Rice in that number 8 position of late. I used to be subscribed to the idea of Rice being exclusively kind of that number 6 player, but he's really gradually started to convince me that he could be the answer to the left 8. But we need more, I think, from him in that position. But yeah, I think, Jamie, there is an argument that Bruno Guimaraes would be less of a risk and then Rice at 6. But I think price-wise, Newcastle are going to ask for a hell of a lot more than what Zubi would ultimately cost. And that could ultimately have a massive impact on our striker challenge as well, and who we go for in that area. Sue says, I'd imagine Zubimendi is the type of player that improves players around him, much like Jorginho. A lot of people don't see how he makes a team better. And I think this is a really good point as well. Teams tend to be better with players like Zubimendi, facilitators. They tend to be better with those. And maybe it's the stars and the individual kind of heroes of size that players kind of have more of an attachment to, that we don't necessarily have in the same way with a player like Zubimendi. Chima says Zubi is quality. I had doubts about his defensive attributes, but I really think he'll be fine. I think that is where most people have concern. It's interesting that kind of about the defensive side, because he ranks exceptionally highly for across midfielders. That's not just defensive midfielders, by the way. That's midfielders overall. When you look at kind of the FB ref stats here, 1.22 interceptions per 90, 69th percentile across all midfielders, blocks 76th percentile, 1.45 per game, clearances 92nd percentile, 2.57 clearances per match, aerial duels 1.62, 85th percentile for that area. So like across midfielders, and that's why maybe the stats for his passing, he doesn't necessarily rank in the same way as some others, because he's not being compared against 6s, he's being compared against 6s, 8s, and sometimes 10s as well in this area. So I think that actually his stats stand out more than people think, but just because he's not amazing kind of across the board everywhere in every single facet, he doesn't necessarily kick on with those numbers like some other players might do. Raz says Zubimendi is more of a DM. I think a lot of our fans prefer someone perhaps more attacking. And maybe this is the point. There's such a feeling about Arsenal needing more in attack, that this emphasis on the midfield and the defensive midfielder that we absolutely need to sign, because Partey and Jorginho are likely both going to go in the summer. This is a really, really, really important position. Think about when Patrick Vieira left, how long it took for us to replace Patrick Vieira and Gilberto Silva, of course, who I actually thought was more of the player that we needed to replace and never did. Think about how many years we were saying Arsenal need to find the guy. We went through loads of players. Abu Diaby was thought might be that player, but he was more of an 8 and then, of course, got injured. Lucas Torreira eventually came along, was never that player. I think there's somebody else as well that we signed, naturally is escaping. Denilson, was more of an 8, never really managed to get into that mould. We just never really replaced it. Francis Coquelin, of course, you will remember, had a couple of really good seasons, but was never of kind of a world-class caliber. Played alongside a very good Santi Cazorla, of course, for a couple of seasons as well. But we never replaced Vieira and Gilberto Silva until we signed Thomas Partey. Thomas Partey was the first time we'd really made an effort to go into the market and add that player. And that was, of course, when Arteta came along, identified the key areas that we needed to improve on and moved for those players. We move forward now, we're losing Thomas Partey and Jorginho, of course, to a lesser extent. Straight away, we're going into the market and we're adding one of, if not the best defensive midfield option on the market for the summer. And that shows you the difference in how Arsenal these days, opposed to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, approach the transfer market. And I think that shows you that growth in that element and that area as well. Shane says, hi, Tom. I think you hit the nail on the head. Partey seems to have a bit of a cult following. I see comments on all channels. I'm a big fan of the meltdowns, but would be a huge if Partey got injured again. Exactly. I think that is maybe an element. I do see like Partey has a very dedicated following behind him. And I think that maybe that when you talk about him being replaced, naturally, because there's a huge fandom behind Partey, that then leads to a lot of people kind of slamming the guy that's coming in to replace Partey in the squad. Lee says, Tom Zubimendi has been linked with Arsenal over the last several seasons, and it was the player who didn't want to come in. What makes you think he is Arsenal bound this summer? Everything that I hear, Lee, to be honest. There's a lot of really good feeling about this deal, just from my own sources, from sort of colleagues of mine as well. There's a consensus, really, that there is a real confidence that Zubimendi this summer seems to be on the move, and not only just on the move, but that Arsenal have worked very hard on this deal for quite some time. Mr. Thugi says about the Zubimendi stuff, he seems like a system player, and a lot of fans haven't seen him play, just checking his stats, which isn't impressive, to be honest. So it's easy to form a negative opinion of him. Wazza says, I think with the Zubi thing, he isn't spoken about as much because he isn't a hype player that the fan base have been demanding, like an Isak or a Sesko. Also, his position plays a major role in debates as well. Real says, Tom apologising for the audio level. If it's good enough for Fabrizio Romano, I think we can imagine until you return to the usual place. Does Fab use AirPods then? Is that the reference? Otherwise, that's gone way over my head. Sifa Ben says, I think we just need to accept that Newcastle are going to qualify for the Champions League. I think even if they beat City, even if City beat the main charges, they'll have to get a deduction for non-cooperation. I genuinely don't think that Newcastle qualifying for the Champions League changes anything about Alexander Isak's future. I know it's what's been talked about. I know it's what's been spoken about. I feel as though if Isak is going to leave, it is going to be because he wants to go to that next level. It's not about just playing in the Champions League for Isak. If Isak wants to go, he will go, regardless of whether Newcastle are in the Champions League or not. By the way, if you haven't seen Gary Neville talking about how he feels that Manchester United are one of the types of clubs that Isak might want to play for, please go and watch it. It will make your Tuesday a little bit happier. Martin says, Tom, I think a lot of fans want players who fit a profile of how they want us to play rather than actually looking at how we do play and suggesting players that fit that. I think that's a really good point. Tom says, do you think that Zubimendi might look too physically frail for a 6 in the Premier League, especially when you compare him to Partey, who is a beast of a player? Just trying to think of why some maybe are not as keen. Of course, physically, he is not the same type of specimen as what Partey is, but he has other attributes, of course, that are a lot more adept than what Partey is. I think he suits the Arteta system of how he progressed the ball and how we work with the ball, and that Spanish pivote type. That, I think, suits Arteta's system perhaps even more so than what Partey does. And the problem with Partey is that you don't know when he's next going to be absent. He could be absent at any minute, any moment. And of course, now into his 30s, that likelihood obviously naturally just increases with time. Orange Juice, in the shadow of Rodri, if he doesn't play Rodri-esque damn near every match, people want to discourage him somehow. This is the person that came on for Rodri in the European Championship final against England and was arguably better than Rodri was in the first half, helped see out that win against England. Of course, when they went 1-1, Zubimendi was still very keen and clear in how they built up, how they controlled the ball, how they beat England in that final. So, again, it's very frustrating, I think, how people talk the way they do, if you like, about Zubimendi. Gooner says, Tom, do you think Partey's performances this season still is negated by his injury record? No, of course not. Partey's performances this season you can look at in isolation and talk about without reference to the injuries that he suffered. We've been very fortunate that Partey's been available as much as he has done this season, because that's been a big part of why the midfield has been in some ways propped up, because Odegaard's been dropped off. Rice has had a bit of an up and down season. He's started to come back second half of the season in particular into much better form. But Partey for a while was the real inform force of that team, of that midfield. So, no, I think you can absolutely separate the two and talk about them in two different ways. Jay says, do you think Arsenal need a tall, strong striker or a small, quick, pacey striker? I think we need both, Jay. I think we need a striker that's got that physicality about them, but has got that power and speed. And of course, Isak is that. Sesko has a lot of those traits. Gyökeres has a lot of those traits. And thankfully, they seem to be the three players that Arsenal are mainly looking at. It's not a small, diminutive, technical centre forward like an Julian Alvarez, for instance. They're looking at more of those taller, more powerful, athletic figures that have got combinations of strength and speed, but also abilities to be technical and to take players on and have that ability to beat a man. So we're looking for a combination of all of that. I think that's what ultimately Arteta and Arsenal are looking to do the most. Lisa's told me, if Zubimendi comes, do you think it will improve Odegaard's game, as he's been well below par lately? I certainly hope so. It's never going to be a guarantee that that happens. We know ultimately how good Odegaard can be. We know that Odegaard in his last 2 seasons was of a world-class standard. This season, he hasn't been. He hasn't been, for many reasons, both within and without his control. Injury, illness being those out of his control. But since coming back, he has not performed particularly great. There's been some games where he's threatened to deceive, the PSV away game being one of those, of course. Outside of that, you're struggling to kind of pick up the really good performances from Odegaard again. that needs to change. Absolutely. Mikey says the good news is that Andrea Berta will know Zubimendi very well, coming from the same league. I have my reservations, but I hope the presence of the new director of football will help make the right decision and mitigate my doubts. He is to be very, very highly rated in Spain. People working in Spanish football, be that journalists or directors, rate this guy very, very, very highly indeed. And for that, I, I think we've talked about this with Sid. Andrea Berta, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily going to be his job to identify the key talents this summer. This summer's job for Andrea Berta is about getting the deals done. It's not about finding the gems. That will come later. That will come in 26, 27, 28, and beyond. We know who the targets are. We know who the best centre forwards are. We know who the best left wingers are. We know who the best DMs are. We don't need a diamond eyes Sven Mislintat to spot the gems this summer. We know who the best players are. It's his job to get that done within the financial parameters that Arsenal have. We will see his identification talents later on. Maybe we'll see it a little bit this summer with some of the left field type of picks for maybe like a defender or a backup goalkeeper. But even then, we kind of have an idea of some of the players that Arsenal are already keen on. We've already done a lot of work on the Zubi deal. These types of things are all about, the getting of the deals done. It's not about finding players this summer. It's about signing players. In the future windows, it'll be about finding the gems. We know who we need to get this summer. It's their job to get them through the door. Orange Juice says, if Zubimendi went to Madrid, would you consider checking in on Camavinga or Tchouaméni? Of course, you've got to look for market opportunities. If in that scenario that was to happen, I think you've got to try and look at those players as potentially somebody that you would obviously go for. Iozen says, what is the probability of Arsenal signing Gyökeres since his signing value has become 60 million? There's no suggestion really that is the case. There's no suggestion legitimately that Sporting will accept £60 million. He has a €100 million release clause. He is arguably the highest, most frequent goal scorer on the planet right now. Sporting have absolutely no reason not to demand the release clause for Gyökeres, unless the interest in him is not of a level where they're getting those types of bids and he wants to force a move, then maybe it will drop. But from my personal point of view, I cannot get on board with the reports that suggest that Gyökeres will be available for far less than his release clause, when in reality, there are going to be a lot of clubs very interested in Gyökeres. And if you've got the interest as the selling club, you can demand a much higher figure. And when you've got a release clause, you are very much well within your rights to demand that release clause when that level of interest. It's not like with Benjamin Sesko, where there's kind of an agreement that after this season, if a club of the level of Arsenal or Chelsea or whatever comes in for Sesko, that there is kind of this 60 million-ish figure for Sesko that is felt like that would get a deal done. It may be that there's so much interest that Leipzig can start to, get into a bidding war. At the end of the day, if clubs bid this and then someone bids higher or someone bids higher again and so on, it could get much bigger. But with a player like Gyökeres, there's no indication legitimately that Sporting have to accept anything below that release clause. Nor should they. Why should they accept anything below that release clause? They've got arguably the most sought-after attacking talent other than Isak on the market, and they've got a release clause there. So why would you do anything else? Mike says, Tom, what did you think about Harry's rant? I only managed to catch the first half of it before we went out yesterday, so I still need to finish it. But I think it's brave of Harry to talk about. You're going on to a platform and criticising other people. Now, of course, we have our own connections here to TalkSport. We are the Arsenal representative. I'll try that word again. Representative for the fan network over there at TalkSport. Because when that was given to me as an offer of, would you like to be the Arsenal representative for our new fan network we're starting? I was thinking, well, I know a lot of our listeners are quite critical of a lot of the views on TalkSport. A lot of our listeners are not fans of some of the views that we hear on TalkSport. I've got a few questions. One of the questions is, can I be critical of what people are saying on TalkSport? Do I have to agree with everything? Do I have to curb my opinion in any way to be part of this fan network? And the answer was no. we're about opinions. We get people to phone in, have their opinions, say what they want within the boundaries of what is respectful, of course, and you can have your opinions. So I don't. It's not surprising that Harry was able to go on there and be critical of people that themselves are on that platform, and that's one of the reasons why I was open to joining up and being the Arsenal rep for Talksport's Fan Network in that sense, because I was sitting there thinking, well, I'd kind of like to be there in the sense of we can be that critical light as well. That's why I'm very happy to go on kind of the Arsenal Inside Gooner show that they do, of course, as well in the studio with Clive and so on, because it's about being critical. It's about holding people's opinions to account. It's about not being scared to face that scrutiny. So fair play to Harry, and I think it's important to call out opinions that are wrong, opinions that are subjected and in some ways are quite systemic in how they are born in certain ways. So yeah, I think that's really key to highlight. Mohammed says, I don't think Zubimendi is a type of player that we want. I have watched him more than 10 times, and I don't think he solves our creativity problem in midfield. That's because he's not coming in to do that, Mohammed. That's not what he's coming in to do. That's not his job. His job is not to create chances for Arsenal. Zubimendi's job is to play the system that gets the ball into the areas where those creative figures can do their best work. Delivering that delivery service while also maintaining that shield in front of the back line. That's what Zubimendi's job is. So if you're watching more than 10 games of Zubimendi, looking him in a sense of, I'm going to look at this guy and see how creative he is, then you have been watching him in the wrong way in every single game that you have watched him, because that's not what his job is. That's not what he is about. He isn't the 10, he is the 6. And so that's why, unfortunately, you've probably misrepresented Zubi and how maybe you've spoken about him or how you've watched him, because that's what you're looking for, you're not going to get what it's like going, I'm looking at a defender to how good they are in the opposition box. That's not what their job is. That's not what you rate them on. So that's what's really important. Arthur, if you want to go and watch Harry's rant, he did upload it onto his channel. I'll get you the link for that in just a second. Harry Simu. But yes, he did upload it. It needed to be said was the title of the video thumbnail. Defending the Arsenal, Gabriel to Saudi and Jorginho in Brazil. I'll put a link to that in today's video description. You go watch Harry's show. It is in today's video description. You might need to give it a refresh so it pops up, but I will put it in the chat box as well. There you go. Jabu says, I think Zubimendi is a fantastic player. He is falling victim to our lack of attacking signings. It's just feelings, nothing more. One who's impressed Marino every single time. Only one. I've had loads, but I do think that Marino gets a tough ride. I have been scrutinizing of him, critical of him, but I do think he's incredibly underrated still as a player in our team. Clive says, a bit behind, but I did a Zubimendi scouting video, of course, on the Vision, which if you're a Patreon listener, you can go and check out yourselves as well. Highly recommend you go and do that. You can also listen to a certain someone called Tom Canton on one of their Patreon shows ever so recently with Elliot doing their power ranking. So worth checking out. He is class, Clive says. Timing of pass, both feet is top class. He sees the open space quicker than any of our current deeper centre midfielders. So take it from Clive, who, despite being wrong on Marino a few times, is quite good when it comes to scouting players. So go and check out Clive and Elliot's scouting video on Zubimendi, because it's definitely worth your ears listening. And with that, we'll bring an end to today's show. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Really appreciate your time. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of your Tuesday. I'll be back with you in the usual surroundings tomorrow morning, bright and early, Wednesday, 8 a.m. UK time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, the Arsenal.